The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Last week, I told you that the 12 nations involved in the Trans-Pacific Partnership have finalized what is going to be part of the deal. This does not mean that the deal has been actually approved by the individual countries, but merely that we have what is a final version of what will ultimately be discussed by the member countries. WikiLeaks has released the final text for the intellectual property rights chapter. And as I mentioned last week, we are talking, when thinking about the 12 countries involved in TPP, we're talking about a deal that will impact 40% of global GDP. The text is still being withheld from the public, but the particular intellectual property chapter has been obtained by WikiLeaks. This could impact the internet. It will impact medicine. It will impact publishers. It will impact civil liberties and biopatents and big corporations and their ability to impose the power of copyright and patent on small businesses and others. What did Public Citizens Global Access to Medicines Program Director say? This is Peter Mayberduk. It's not good. Quote, the new monopoly rights for big pharma firms would compromise access to medicines in TPP countries. The TPP would cost lives. As a sort of guide to who came out on top in this thing, note that hundreds of representatives from big corporations were direct parties to the negotiations. Elected officials, very little or no access. Individuals, Lewis, absolutely no access. And Hillary Clinton previously referred to TPP as, quote, the gold standard in trade agreements. Can you imagine something more horrific? More recently, though, she did come out and say, based on what I know so far, I can't support this agreement. So what is in the chapter on intellectual property? The Electronic Frontier Foundation combed through it, and this is a huge understatement. They are alarmed. They are alarmed, which is such a drastic understatement. They notice that when you skim through it, it sort of seems like there's balanced provisions. Oh, here's some provisions that protect people. And then here's some provisions that protect corporations and countries. But when you look at the detail, Lewis, the provisions meant to protect people are non-binding guidelines, right? Sort of suggestions. And then when you look at the provisions protecting the big corporations, those are binding in black and white pieces of the deal.
That sounds about right. I mean, if you know, citizens had no say in what was being written here, and this is all just corporations protecting themselves, yes, the pieces about protecting citizens will be incredibly vague so that nothing can hold up in court.
The general themes, the expansion of copyright terms, for example, the extension of copyright terms to life plus 70 years, the amount, this basically is a transfer of wealth from users to large rights-holding corporations, a ban on circumventing digital rights management. So if you have someone tinkering with a file or a device that contains copyrighted work, they can be made criminally liable even if there is no specific copyright infringement by a broad ban on circumventing digital rights management, which of course is not a legal issue. Digital rights management is a corporate issue. And then, of course, the full-on craziness, criminal enforcement and civil damages. Rights holders can submit any legitimate measure of value to determine damages in a copyright case. So to give you an example of this, what's a good example? Think back to Napster and LimeWire lawsuits. You download 300 MP3s, right? You could conceivably, based on what TPP has in the intellectual property chapter, you could be sued for the MSRP, the full value of the property that a corporation can reasonably assign to their product. That is insane, Lewis. I mean, think about the potentially bankrupting nature of that.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, a lot of this will come down to what the court decides is, I mean, is this totally up to, you know, it can't be totally up to the company, right?
Well, what this does is set a framework that operates outside of an individual country's judicial system. And that's what's so scary about it. And the list goes on in doing that, Lewis, protecting trade secrets in a way that's bad for people, instituting top-down control of the internet, and the bomb throwing is starting with regard to the people that allowed this to happen. NDP leader Tom Mulcair in Canada said that Prime Minister Stephen Harper was played like a chump in the talks that led to TPP. Mulcair saying that conservatives were duped into accepting a really bad deal, that Canada should reject it. A significant part of this is politics, but it also goes to something else I've been wondering, Lewis, which is how much do individual presidents and prime ministers really have in terms of power here? Because we see both more liberal, moderate, and conservative leaders basically just in tow when it comes to TPP, at least with regard to what we know of what came out of it.
Yeah, okay. Well, look at President Obama. Can he snap his fingers and make GM and all these other corporations pay what they should be paying in taxes? No. He's at the mercy of Congress. So I assume the same thing is true in many countries.
That's what's happening with one chapter of TPP. You know we'll continue to cover it because unlike corporate media, we're covering it. And that's one of the great things that we are able to do, which corporate media seems unable or unwilling to do, as we've told you many, many times. Barely after the Umpqua Community College shooting in Roseburg, Oregon, which killed nearly 10 people, we have two more mass school shootings. Early Friday morning, a freshman at Northern Arizona University took out a handgun and shot 4 other students in a confrontation. One of those students is dead. Police reportedly arrested the shooter after he stopped firing. He has been charged with first-degree murder and 3 felony counts of aggravated assault for the people he shot but did not kill. Hours later, another school shooting near Texas Southern University's campus. 2 people reportedly shot in that incident, one of them dead. And according to Everytown for Gun Safety, there have been 144 school shootings in the United States since 2013, an average of 1 per week. And in 2015, there has been about 1 mass shooting per day for the year so far. The state of affairs around mass shootings, Lewis, is so bad. I find myself not surprised and not having a visceral reaction to these shootings because it has become normal. I go about my day. I wake up. I have my breakfast. I look through the news. I plan the show. I send some emails. There's a mass shooting. We do the show. I edit the show. I go to bed, right? It's become the background to our everyday lives.
And I think to some extent, the people who are on the other side of the gun control issue are probably feel the way they do for the exact same reason, right? Because most of them are not being affected by this type of violence.
Well, they hear about this and the pro-gun right says, oh, well, we need more guns on campus, right? So everybody can defend themselves. That's the reflexive reaction also as non-involved, non-participants in these shootings.
Exactly. So I think, yeah, that's what's happening here. And you're right. I have the same reaction, Dave. I just don't feel sick to my stomach like I did other times when hearing about shootings.
And when the pro-gun right suggests more guns on campus is the solution, what they're essentially saying is they believe the best outcome to someone attempting a mass shooting, like at a school, for example, is a multi-party shootout on campus. They think what we need, the solution here is when one person takes out a gun and starts firing, many others do as well. And that is the step forward, which is a delusional and depraved way of thinking.
Yeah, I agree. And I hope it doesn't come down to that. I will be talking on the bonus show about University of Texas because they have just enacted, a weapon carrying situation on campus there. And that's kind of interesting.
Remember that these headlines help the NRA. Lots of shootings, it's unsafe. You should buy more guns. Not a lot of shootings, great. It's because guns are keeping us safe. In either way, for the NRA, the answer is more guns. I told you last week or the week before that John Boehner, Republican Speaker of the House, is resigning. Very quickly, Congressman Kevin McCarthy became a sort of front runner to replace John Boehner. And part of the context of Boehner's resignation was the Tea Party fringe is getting in the way of being able to get anything done. It's not going well. And the idea was maybe Kevin McCarthy could be a guy that is able to, I don't know, take the reins in some way. Minutes before the Thursday vote to determine the next speaker, Kevin McCarthy abandoned his campaign for speaker. He thought he could win. He ended up being crippled by the same problems that were impacting John Boehner. He said that Republicans created the Select Committee on Benghazi to harm Hillary Clinton's chances of winning the presidency. He was absolutely right about that. And immediately, Lewis, he was punished because you're not supposed to admit that.
Yeah, well, I applaud him for admitting that. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious to anyone who looks at the details of that whole situation. But yeah, it just shows you just how immature and selfish a lot of these Republicans are.
There's also been an unsubstantiated rumor that Kevin McCarthy was having an affair with Representative Renee Elmers. There was never any sort of confirmation of that. But also in the wake of his removal, of his stepping down as a candidate for speaker, an anti-abortion Republican donor, this is from within the GOP, named Stephen Bayer, sent out an email, and this led to Charles C. Johnson publishing a thing about this supposed affair. This was imploded from the inside, Lewis. And to the extent that this helps get more progressive ideas forward and made into law, that's great. The concern, though, is that the extremist fringe of the Republican Party is gaining power, and that's very, very scary. But broad strokes, infighting within the Republican Party is a great thing for progressives.
Yeah, it has been a tumultuous time for the party. There are realists within the party who know what they need to do if they want to stay relevant. And then, yeah, we have the crazies. So, yeah, by all means, let them duke it out.
And to some extent, John Boehner, for all the issues on which we disagree with him, he was more of a realist. That's a reality, and that was part of what led to his ultimate resignation. It is Columbus Day, but we are here live.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by our viewers. Today's new member of the day is Lawrence Congdon. Lawrence, thank you for being a member. You can join Lawrence at davidpakman.com/membership. Memberships are really cheap. You get a ton of great perks, and that's how the show is funded, Lewis. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. There's no way around it. Join Lawrence as a member, davidpakman.com/membership. If you ever shop on Amazon.com, you can support the work we do with your Amazon shopping. Go to davidpakman.com/Amazon. Very easy to remember. It will redirect you towards Amazon's website. Do your shopping. Nothing else you have to do. We'll get a little kickback for whatever you buy. Over the last week, I've noticed that Amazon Instant Video is blowing up, Lewis. And it's super interesting in the context of Netflix continuing to grow, some moderate cord cutting data going on with regard to people canceling cable TV, and now Amazon Video. I mean, we see every week how much of our audience is buying stuff, shows, movies, whatever, on Amazon Video. It is growing and growing and growing. So this is certainly something that represents a change in media consumption habits. And also, Lewis, I notice the number of DVDs purchased by our audience has decreased over time.
Yeah, that is true. I still have, I can't remember the last time I used one of my own DVDs. I mean, I have a ton of them. But Dave, things are changing, and pretty soon you will very easily be able to have access to any movie or show from your internet, through your smart TV. It's all happening.
I am glad I never built up a big DVD collection. I think I have maybe 30 DVDs, half of which were gifts. And I don't even really plan on moving them to Boston with me. I think for the most part, everything I want to watch is online somewhere, either via Amazon or Netflix or whatever else. And I love the element of decluttering. That's a really great thing. I now don't have to schlep around this big box of DVDs wherever I go.
Well, you can do what I did and just take them all out of their cases and put them into a binder, if you will, and sleeve them up like that. That's easy enough.
All right. Remember, anytime you shop on Amazon, davidpakman.com/membership. Support our show when you buy the stuff that you were going to buy anyway. Bernie Sanders, currently the most liberal of the current slate of Democratic and Republican presidential candidates, has been making fundraising headlines. I told you last week he raised almost as much money as Hillary Clinton during the third quarter of 2015. Hillary raising around $28 million, and Bernie Sanders raising somewhere between 25 and 26 million, in spite of having fewer fundraising events and raising less money from big donors when compared to Hillary Clinton. As the Republicans are now releasing their third quarter fundraising data, we've got some more interesting information. Bernie Sanders appears to have raised more money during the third quarter than every single Republican presidential candidate during the same amount of time. Not every candidate has released their full fundraising bounty, I guess we will call it. The one who seems to be the closest is Ben Carson, who raised $20 million compared to Bernie Sanders' $26 million. Jeb Bush raising around $11 million. Let's not forget, though, part of the reason the numbers look like this is that the donation dollars on the Republican side are being divided amongst many more candidates right now than on the Democratic side. So that may well be a factor. At the same time, it's quite fascinating that Bernie Sanders has been able to outdo every Republican candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, because presumably there are Republicans that have Koch backing and the big corporation backing and all of that. So, there's still money we don't know about, right?
Well, let's get to that. The direct donations are capped at $5,400 at different stages. You're able to donate, I don't remember, it's $2,000 or $2,500, and then post-primary, whatever. The huge money, the unlimited money, is money donated to super PACs, and that does seem to be giving Republicans a big edge. For example, Jeb Bush's super PAC raised over $100 million in the first half of 2015, 9 times what Jeb Bush's campaign raised during that amount of time. Bernie Sanders has rejected the idea of forming a super PAC if he does end up being a truly viable candidate in the sense that he wins the Democratic primary, rather, or is in position to win it. Money is going to start coming in from other places, whether he likes it or not. And he may well have no connection organizationally to it, Lewis, or even in terms of an endorsement. Organizationally, I don't think it's legal for him to have a connection, but the money is going to start coming in.
Yeah, it will. And it may not be as much as what someone like Jeb can raise through his super PAC. But unfortunately, it's going to be necessary.
I mean, I completely agree with Bernie on campaign finance. At the same time, we're thinking pragmatically about, could he win if he can become the nominee? We don't know that. New polls in Nevada and South Carolina not looking good for Bernie, in spite of Iowa and New Hampshire looking quite good. We have to see. Could he win, Lewis, without receiving any money from outside sources? Historically speaking, probably not.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to how polarized are voters in the election, right? I mean, if his money is not going to be able to sway Republicans, people who identify as Republicans or independents anyway, then it might not matter. But what's the deal with independents?
Yeah, that's also a question. Many of the state polls, speaking of independents, have many undecided voters so far in the primary polling that is going on so far. There's an interesting website, predictit.org, and they take bets on any number of compelling political questions and races, and they tell you where the money is betting right now. This is interesting because we know that there are 2 types of polls you can do. You can call someone and say, who would you like to see be the president? Who are you going to vote for? And then you can ask them, who do you think ultimately will be president or the nominee? And when you ask people who they think will ultimately win, they are way more accurate than just looking at the polls themselves based on opinion. So when we look at how people are betting, it gives us some interesting insight. On predictit.org, the money suggests that Marco Rubio, followed by Jeb Bush, are the most likely to be the Republican presidential nominees. On the Democratic side, the money is behind Hillary Clinton very heavily, about doubling Bernie Sanders. In terms of the eventual presidential election, Hillary Clinton, according to the money that is being bet at predictit.org, Hillary Clinton expected to defeat Jeb Bush. Will Joe Biden run? The no money significantly defeats the yes money. Most people believe, when they're betting on it, that Donald Trump will not ultimately run as a third-party candidate. When asked which Republican will drop next, George Pataki, followed by Bobby Jindal, have the most money going behind those possibilities. The question of who will ultimately be the Republican vice presidential candidate, Carly Fiorina and John Kasich, more or less tied for first, and who will be the Democratic vice presidential candidate, Julian Castro, followed by Elizabeth Warren. It's not surprising to me, Lewis, that sometimes these websites can be more accurate. Back in 2012, pollsters like Gallup were forecasting a Romney victory. The Ireland-based prediction market called Intrade said Barack Obama would win. They were much closer to the reality, and obviously correct with the eventual winner, than the actual polling agency Gallup. This has some historical track record.
Yeah, it all depends on how you collect your information, and someone is going to get it right. So we'll just have to keep following it. I mean, a lot of what the money is on here are things that if we just had to guess, we'd agree with, right?
Yeah, I do believe, and this is not something that thrills me, that when you step back from the Republican primary, Jeb Bush seems like a pretty safe bet in many cases. He is much safer in the sense of politically for Republicans than a lunatic like Donald Trump or Ben Carson. I disagree with a ton of what Jeb says, but historically speaking, based on how the Republican Party has selected their candidates in the past, it feels like Jeb is one of the top candidates, putting the polls aside for now. I get that we're ignoring what the polls say right now. That's just the feeling that I get.
I guess, yeah. And every time we say that, he says something completely crazy that makes our stomachs turn. But we'll see. Maybe you're right.
I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at LewisMotamedi, LouisMotamedi. Follow us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Luke Vargas is the United Nations Bureau Chief for Talk Radio News Service. He's joined us from all over the world, and today he is in Bolivia, the site of the People's World Conference on Climate Change and the Defense of Life, which is a summit hosted by the president, Evo Morales. Ban Ki-moon was there. We also had appearances from the presidents of Venezuela and Ecuador. Really a cast of characters of important political figures from different areas. This is the second time that this conference has been held. People may not be familiar with the conference, Luke, so let's start there.
Sure. It seems like an unlikely place to hold a meeting of this type. This town, Tiquipaya, which is on the outskirts of Cochabamba, is a very small, quiet community. The reason it's being held here is not because of any special environmental significance of this place. It's because it's the political headquarters of President Morales. So it's more of out of political and organizational expediency. The real intellectual impetus for holding this conference goes back to 2009. There were climate talks in Copenhagen that were deemed by most activists to be an utter failure for two main reasons. One, China and the United States essentially hijacked the negotiating process of that treaty. They negotiated in a back room and sort of scrapped years of negotiations up until that point. And the other reason was that there was a goal in Copenhagen of mimicking sort of a binding commitment akin to Kyoto. And instead, what we saw was a more non-binding sort of accord. And what began to happen was that targets were done away with, the individual commitments of countries, and in their place, we started looking at outcomes. It's when we started shifting the conversation from what should each country do, what should they ought to do, to what's the maximum level of temperature increase that the world can stomach to avoid the adverse effects of climate change. So it's sort of that marginalization in a political sense, and also the depressing realization that climate targets were just getting weaker and weaker that prompted the government in 2010 to hold the first Tiquipaya climate change conference here.
And so we had that first conference in 2010. What were the sort of specific policies advocated there? How now, 5 years later, can we evaluate where we are in comparison to or in relation to what was discussed then? And then what specifically came of this year's talks?
Well, it's depressing. If you talk to the organizers of this conference, their assessment is that in the 5 years since, things have pretty much gotten worse. I can sort of back that up. I'll take three main points. The first is the argument that rich countries shouldn't negotiate on behalf of developing countries. That's improved a little bit. Algeria is one of two countries helping to craft the Paris Climate Treaty. The United States is the other one, and I guess it's better that the U.S. has been involved in this from the very start instead of coming in at the last minute and throwing things into chaos. So the developing countries essentially do have a voice. Though I'll point out again that Laurent Fabius, the French foreign minister who's chairing the Paris climate talks, has also said on many occasions that the treaty needs to be non-binding in certain areas so that the U.S. Senate doesn't need to approve a treaty. So in that regard, the developing world is still setting the agenda. The other two areas are about sort of the fixes that you might put in place to mitigate climate change. Bolivia is very much upset by the notion that after Copenhagen, when it didn't look like the world was going to be able to stop climate change, that these so-called false solutions started being talked about. Geoengineering, GMOs, biofuels, nanotechnology to re-engineer rivers and remove pollution from the air and from the water. This is viewed as sort of a betrayal of the protection of the planet by here in Bolivia. And unfortunately, as we look towards Paris, we see a huge corporate interest there. Many countries realize this is a chance for us to make money off of this, and as opposed to, what are the best solutions for the planet. And third is what we call technology transfer, in favor of this notion that rich countries should help or entirely subsidize the cost of adapting low-carbon technologies in the developing world. They don't want there to be patents in place for the technologies that save the environment. They want locally run businesses in each country to have a chance to implement these measures. And again, as we look towards Paris, I think the conclusion that many people have here is that there's just way too much corporate influence on this, and they've taken over where political leaders have failed.
Well, in thinking of capitalism and corporate influence and some of the players that were there, starting with, of course, President Evo Morales, the idea of the anti-capitalist summit would lead some to question whether there are some climate technologies that maybe are viable technologies, but are being tossed aside more as a result of what they represent within that idea of capitalism. Is that happening?
I think it is happening to a degree, and as an American, I'm very used to the way political rhetoric works in the U.S. When you have a summit and its title is the anti-capitalist gathering, where capitalism is described by President Morales as the cancer to Mother Earth, it's easy to start reading some suspicion into each of the things that are said. With regards to certain renewable energies, I certainly think the skepticism of technology has led Bolivia to not be as diverse in terms of its energy sources. There's a big poster going around here that says the Bolivian government should have 20% solar energy by 2020. Currently, even though they have very high solar irradiation here, there's hardly any solar power compared to neighboring countries that have really taken this on. So there is some skepticism there. Nanotechnology, again, I looked at the end document from the 2010 conference, and it said, we need to reject nanotechnology. And I talked to the organizer of that conference yesterday, the former UN ambassador, and said, sounds like you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. Nanotechnology helps the world. It gives you the iPhone that you're holding now. And he said, oh, well, we only meant nanotechnology insofar as geoengineering projects, which are a false promise. And I said, look, words matter here, and you need to be very careful about not making the world think that you're just rejecting progress in pursuit of what are some noble goals. So again, it speaks to sort of maybe one of the difficulties of this conference, which is that it's being chaired by a very ideological government. Evo Morales is quite a bombastic politician, to say the very least. And again, I think some of his statements turn off much greater swaths of the world than are actually turned on by his message at times.
In thinking of people in glass houses throwing stones, or the pot calling the kettle black, or whatever, a proverb, analogy, whatever you want to use. During the UN climate talks in Poland, we talked with you about how the Polish government has heavy reliance on coal, and that sort of overshadowed the event and it caused some credibility questions. The Bolivian government, are they living up to the rhetoric that they are pushing vis-a-vis this conference?
The issue of deforestation is one where a lot of critics say they're not. There's actually this little comic going around that shows Evo Morales holding a chainsaw and cutting down the forests. Now, Bolivia has very low carbon emissions per capita when you do not factor in deforestation. When you begin to put that into the picture and you talk about 300,000 hectares or more being deforested a year, and in particularly damaging ways, including burning down the forests, this becomes a big issue. Now, Evo Morales lectures regularly on the fact that Bolivians have more trees per capita than the United States or Western Europe. That's really only half of the picture here. And this is a particularly problematic issue here in Bolivia because of the very unique way that climate change is affecting this country. In areas where deforestation is occurring, climate change is actually increasing the temperatures and causing there to be more precipitation. And the problem with deforestation is it removes the stable soil base and it increases flooding. It increases basically the risks of extra rain. In the big cities where water is in high demand, we're seeing climate change bring the temperatures, make them colder. It's more arid. And so those are the areas where there's water scarcity being encountered, and it's worsening that area. So again, when you talk about what Bolivia needs to do, it really, you would think, needs to be working more on cutting down deforestation. And this is such a big issue here that this poster I referenced earlier is from an alternate conference that was being held here this week. You'd think that all the issues would fit under the umbrella of this People's Conference. Not so. There was sort of a counter summit where they're saying Evo Morales needs to focus on ending deforestation. Again, very interesting that even a summit like this doesn't include every political persuasion.
Last thing in the very limited time we have left, any bullet point specific appeals or ideas that cut through the clutter at the conference?
Yeah, it was sort of a hodgepodge of everything from anti-oil protests to, here, take a photo with a bust of Hugo Chavez, DVD vendors selling footage of the U.S. invasion of Panama. So again, a whole mess of issues. There were some things that were powerful. The Bolivian government wants there to be a international rights of Mother Earth that is recognized. It's a very meaningful sort of, I can understand the emotions behind that. They want an international climate tribunal to hold countries accountable to their pledges. And finally, in light of all the refugee situations we've been encountering in Europe, and we know this is going to be an issue with climate change, the government here so sensitive to indigenous populations, which truly are adversely affected by climate change and so marginalized in the political process, they want there to be a change in international law that recognizes climate refugees, and they want developed countries to take over basically the responsibility of helping to resettle these people. So, the music was beautiful. Some of the politics got me lost. But again, there are some really overarching, resonant issues here that I hope do carry over to some extent to Paris in December.
All right, Luke Vargas, Talk Radio News Service, joining us today from Bolivia. Luke, thank you as always.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I don't know if you heard about this over the weekend. At a campaign rally in Las Vegas, Donald Trump was talking about being on magazine covers, and he pulls a Colombian woman out of the crowd. And I'm going to play the video for you. It's so bizarre, and it seems so staged to me. It seems like such an obvious setup. Let's play the video and take a look at it.
But Melania looked good, Barron looked good, I look like hell. I have a feeling maybe they picked the picture. They might have picked it, I don't know. But I've been on, there it is. Come here, let me have that, come here. So let me say this. Where are you from?
I'm from Colombia.
Colombia.
Hispanic.
And is this a setup? Did I ever meet you before? Huh?
I'm Hispanic and I vote for Mr. Trump. We vote for Mr. Trump. Yes, Mr. Trump. We love you. We love you. All the way to the White House.
I swear to you, I think she's totally beautiful and great. I never met her before, I swear. This all started with a People magazine. So here's the story. So I love the story. They couldn't have been nicer. Nice story, right? Couldn't be nicer. But I don't know what happened. They played with my nose. I don't want touching.
We now know a little more about this. The woman's name is Myriam Witcher, and she was interviewed by CNN, and she seemed to actually say, yeah, someone from the campaign got in touch with me, but then she said, no, nobody talked to me, in a very strange, wide-ranging interview on CNN. Let's listen to a little bit of that.
Myriam, I mean, I wasn't even there in person. I feel your support, your excitement over Donald Trump. Can you tell me why he excites you so much?
Oh my God, he is coming. He's our man sent from heaven. He's a very, very beautiful human being, beautiful heart, a lot of love and compassion.
Had you ever met Donald Trump before being on stage with him?
Only in my dreams. You are not going to believe what I'm going to tell you. I believe in law attraction. I believe in being a positive person. And 3 nights before he came to Las Vegas, I told my husband, oh, I have a dreams. You can't imagine. I saw Mr. Trump in my dreams, and I saw him like I had the opportunity to give a hug. And I have my Facebook page, and I wrote so many times, Mr. Trump, I'm a Hispanic person, and I hope I had the opportunity to give a hug to you. He doesn't know me in my pictures. I don't have pictures in Facebook about myself.
So did someone from the Trump campaign, Myriam, did they see what you posted on Facebook? Did someone from the campaign reach out to you?
I just, from the campaign, I touch my feelings, I go by my heart, and I'm very similar like Mr. Trump. I just said what I feel, and this is me. And I support him 100%. And I believe our country can be in a good hands. He is a very brilliant person.
I understand you saw him in your dreams, and I think that's wonderful, and you feel it in your heart. But I am just trying to ask: did his campaign talk to you ahead of time?
Nobody. It's not something. I just only talk to God and my computer and my heart, and that's it.
So the woman generally seemed totally disconnected from reality, Louis, even if nobody talked to her ahead of time. The way in which Trump goes directly to her and pulls her out of the crowd, it all seems so patently staged.
Maybe. I'm not completely convinced of that. Now, it could be that she showed up at the event and Trump's people saw her and said...
Exactly.
But she still went to the event, meaning she still supports Trump.
Oh, there's no question she supports Trump. I mean, if you watch her interview on CNN, she's completely disconnected from reality in a way that makes it clear she supports Trump.
I mean, they definitely picked her for a very specific reason. Now, to me, she strikes me, I don't know much about her. I watched the clips. She strikes me as someone who probably really liked, what's his reality show called?
The Apprentice?
The Apprentice, yeah. And I think she is probably just fascinated by the celebrity of Donald Trump.
Yeah, she speaks for almost no Hispanics. I mean, I'm Hispanic. I think Trump is a disaster. Is my view as valid as hers, or is it not as valid because she supports Trump? I mean, this entire idea of let's find individuals. The important thing is not, can we bring someone on stage who's Hispanic and likes Trump? The question is, what does a fair analysis of his ideas mean with regard to large populations? The idea of bringing this woman on stage, aside from the CNN interview being completely abortive, is that it doesn't tell us very much about his policies, that one Hispanic woman likes him.
Yes, so it's great for Trump, but yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. And Dave, I think maybe if you had an accent, or a really thick accent. Maybe the more thick your accent is, the more valid your opinion is, right?
I have to admit, I love the woman's accent. And what is that Colombian actress who's on a sitcom right now?
In Modern Family?
Yes.
Yeah, I forget her name.
Sofia Vergara.
Yeah.
She has a similar accent. And on a recent Howard Stern interview, she said, listen, I'm aware, I've been in this country for a very long time. I'm aware that that accent plays well and it's endearing and people like it. So I'm not saying the accent is fake, but let's just say sometimes I don't go out of my way to not talk that way, right? She was sort of alluding to what we know is a very real impact, because that is a very endearing accent. And, you know, when you hear this woman talk, obviously, if you don't listen to what she's saying, you're like, this sounds like such a nice woman. She just seems so nice.
Yeah, you can't help but like her, and you can't help but think, oh, you poor thing, you know, Trump has completely deceived you.
Ben Carson is one of the leading Republican presidential candidates. He has now said that the Holocaust could have been prevented if only Jews had guns in Nazi Germany. He made his comments during an interview on CNN. He was being interviewed by Wolf Blitzer, who read back a passage from Dr. Carson's new book, A More Perfect Union. And in it, he says that Nazi authorities disarmed German citizens during the 30s before the Holocaust, saying, through a combination of removing guns and disseminating deceitful propaganda, the Nazis were able to carry out their evil intentions with relatively little resistance. He was asked about it by Wolf Blitzer, and he followed up saying, quote, I think the likelihood of Hitler being able to accomplish his goals would have been greatly diminished if the people had been armed. That's a reason these dictatorial people take the guns first. This isn't a new idea. Carson is parroting it, but it's been a parroted idea for a long time that if only the Jews had guns, the Holocaust wouldn't have happened. It's been widely analyzed. It's been widely discussed. It is bogus revisionist history. Deborah Lauder, the civil rights director for the Anti-Defamation League, commented saying, quote, in no way could armed people have stopped the totalitarian power of the Nazi state. There could be symbolic resistance, as we saw in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, but it could not have stopped the Nazis. Not to mention, after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the repression increased exponentially, Lewis. And some European Jews did have access to firearms. It is true that, among other things, that Jews were banned from doing in pre-World War II Germany, gun ownership was part of that. In 1938, the Nazis issued, quote, the regulations against Jews' possession of weapons. The question is whether that was responsible for dooming the Jews, as the pro-gun right suggests, and it is completely without substance. As we heard from columnist Michael Moynihan, guns could not have made the difference. The Holocaust was a state-sanctioned outpouring of violence from the German public. The idea that Jewish survival would have been drastically different if they had more handguns, the guns that they could have conceivably obtained at that time, is simply not true. And this is part of a broader problem, Lewis, which is people see a problem and they see the solution as being a gun, which is very often not the solution.
Yeah, I mean, just think about it. If this minority had small arms, somehow they would have been able to prevent all of this. It's just absurd.
And actually, many civil rights groups say it's offensive.
Well, I don't know if it's offensive. It's just, I mean, I'm not offended by that. I just think it's stupid. I think it's irresponsible to state that, and it's not based in fact. So I would say more irresponsible than offensive.
We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Call anytime, 24 hours a day. Here's a voicemail I received.
We're at a point where we're criticizing, or most of the mainstream is criticizing politicians for politicizing things constantly, even to the point where our major politicians are, like, claiming that other people are politicizing things and trying to say sorry for politicizing things.
Oh, it's a disaster. This after the Umpqua Community College shooting, people were the pro-gun right was saying, let's not politicize this. Wait a second. The reason we have the problem in this country with guns that is so severe is because this entire gun ownership thing has been politicized. It is political. President Obama or anybody addressing the fact that there are politics at play should not be seen, as the caller is pointing out, Lewis, as a bad thing. It is political.
It's political. Dave, you can turn pretty much anything into a political issue. What else can we say about it?
Well, we can say not only can you turn almost anything into a political issue, most things are political issues. And I get the idea of misusing a tragedy for political gain, but there are political realities connected to many of these incidents, and to ignore that would actually be, that's what really would make no sense. On the bonus show today, a Chinese company unveils an autonomous bus, a campus carry protest at the University of Texas, and a bombing in Turkey is followed by a media ban. davidpakman.com/membership to join us on the bonus show. No show tomorrow. We are traveling to Vegas for the Democratic debate. And if all goes well, we will broadcast the rest of the week from Las Vegas, Nevada.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.